as is sometimes the case, the day before I do the podcast, I had a bomb dropped on me. And that bomb was dropped on me by WWE. Because on Saturday, WWE announced that it had come to terms on the release of Bray Wyatt. The Fiend Bray Wyatt. Not the first shocking cut WWE has made this year. They've been cutting a lot of talent, including some big names, but definitely I would say the biggest of them all, the most shocking of them all. We have not seen Bray Wyatt on WWE television since the Firefly Funhouse segment that he did the night after WrestleMania. A WrestleMania where he lost to Randy Orton. This man was burnt to a crisp in their Inferno match in December at TLC. Came back at WrestleMania and lost to Randy Orton. The PW Insider at the time reported that it was a match that he was originally scheduled to win. But that weekend, for whatever reason, it got changed to him losing. And ever since, Bray hasn't really said much on social media. WWE has been mum about why he was off TV. They don't talk about that kind of stuff. It was said to be due to a specific issue of some kind, but there was never any clarity on exactly what that issue was. It did not appear to be injury related. He was seen supposedly backstage at different tapings sometimes, but he was never used. There was a report online that I never fully believed, given that it was never reported by anybody that I would consider reputable, that he may have still had trouble coping with the death of Brody Lee, which did hit him very hard. As you would expect that it would, the two of them were very tight. They were very close. They worked together. They were very good friends. And I can understand that being a very difficult thing to go through. But this report that was going around was talking about how he just hasn't been able to get over it and it's a mental health issue. First of all, I don't know that to be the case. Nobody would. Except Bray Wyatt. Mike Johnson of PW Insider, though, provided more information into the reason why all of this happened. And it's every bit as ridiculous as you would think. PW Insider has confirmed with multiple sources that WWE chose to release Bray Wyatt and that the word going around was that it was a budget-related reason, similar to other big cuts such as Braun Strowman. It was not a case of Wyatt asking to be released. We are told that Wyatt was called by John Laurinaitis and informed it was simply a budgetary decision and not something that Wyatt had done. So the old, it's not you, it's me. They gave him the it's not you, it's me excuse. To say that the reaction within the company was stunned would be a massive understatement given how plugged into licensing the Wyatt character has been in recent years. The Fiend had been a massive hit for t-shirts and action figures. One source pointed the finger squarely at WWE President Nick Khan and CFO Christina Salen, stating that they are obsessed with the company not being even one iota in the red on the financial ledgers, that even after the most recent financial quarter, there had to have been a push to cut costs where, with previous regimes, there would have been more leniency. Others noted that Wyatt and Vince McMahon's relationship behind the scenes ran very hot and cold at times, and that McMahon has given Khan the ability to run things far more than anyone else has historically been able to accomplish. So there was likely less of a pushback over the idea of cutting a big money contract from the ledger. Between this story, this move, and the tone-deaf, stupid comment that Vince McMahon made on the earnings call the other day about sending more talent to AEW, because he was asked a question about AEW, and so he gave an answer about them, and he was talking about how I don't know what their mindset is or what their plans are, but maybe we'll give them some more talent. However sarcastic he may have thought he was being, if you are a WWE roster member, if you are a performer under contract to WWE, I hope this serves as an example that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much effort you put into your character, whatever ideas you may have come up with to try to better yourself and to try to succeed and to try to move up, no matter how bulletproof you think you may be, no matter how fat your contract may be, or how long it may be for, however many years you may have on your contract, you are all expendable. Every single one of you are expendable. And WWE does not care. You are a number. You are a cog in the wheel. And if it's a case of saving a few bucks, just to make sure we stay in the black and not in the red, it doesn't matter how big of a name you are, it doesn't matter what you've done or what you've accomplished, merch you've sold, any of that. This is a prime example here. It doesn't matter. They do not care. And Bray Wyatt is not an exclusive case. He is just another victim of wasted talent in the creative wasteland that is WWE. And I say that even as Bray Wyatt has given me, as a fan at least, two of my favorite WWE memories, probably in at least the last decade. It wasn't all bad with Bray. But to have someone like that, and to let him go so easily, like a janitor, is deplorable. It is deplorable. You look at his career in WWE once he was called up from NXT. When he came in with the cult leader character, the Wyatt family, it was him, it was Luke Harper, it was Eric Rowan. They worked well together. It was a unique character. He had completely reinvented himself. You know, The Fiend is not the first time that Wyndham Rotunda has gone and reinvented himself to try to hit on something that works and to be successful. He was doing the Husky Harris thing. Obviously, that wasn't going anywhere. And so he ended up trying this new character in NXT, and it worked. And it took off in NXT, and you never know, once you hit the main roster if it's going to work, if Vince McMahon is going to believe in it and get behind it. But at first, it seemed like he had really hit on something pretty successful. And you fast forward to the beginning, really the end of 2013 into the beginning of 2014. That's always the period that I look at. That's always the period that I remember and that I am most fond of. Because you had the whole angle they did where Daniel Bryan had to join the Wyatt family. And it wasn't a long partnership. It wasn't a long union. But they were together for a period of several weeks. But it built to a steel cage match. It was a tag team match with Wyatt and Bryan against the Usos on an episode of Raw in January of 2014. Only, I think, a couple of weeks or a few weeks before the Royal Rumble. And I couldn't tell you much about what happened in the actual match itself. I couldn't tell you if it was a good match. I couldn't tell you if it was a shit match. Because it's not about the match. It's about what the match built to. It was about the post-match. And you guys have heard me talk about this moment and praise this moment. I think I've ranked it on some lists I've done on the podcast over the years. When that match was over, the people in that building badly wanted Daniel Bryan to snap out of it. He was almost like in this trance-like state. They wanted him to snap out of it and break free from the chains of the Wyatt family. And part of the reason this worked so well, if not a big part of the reason it worked so well, is because Bryan was so beloved. And this was right in that period where they were getting behind him. He was sort of the anti-authority figure on the roster, the underdog the company really wasn't getting behind. But they, after a while, heading into WrestleMania, they had no choice, right? Punk left. And they anointed Bryan as the champion. And he ended up in that spot that he was in the main event of WrestleMania. But he was so beloved, they just wanted to see him break free. And I remember that scene like it was yesterday of him in the cage, and it looked like he was going to be subservient again to Bray. Bray was going to give him a Sister Abigail. And he escaped, and he stood there, and the place came unglued. And you had Bryan in one corner, you had Wyatt in the other, there was nobody else in the ring. And they pan out, and you see everybody is standing on their feet. And when Bray goes to attack him, Bryan ducks, and he starts firing away. Daniel Bryan is back. He's firing off with shotgun drop kicks in the corner. This building, it looked on television like it was shaking. These people were going out of their minds. And he shed the skin of the Wyatt family. He took off the overalls, whatever it was, the outfit that he was wearing. Harper's trying to get in. Rowan's trying to get in. Bryan's knocking him down. And this was the first time that I can recall in the middle of all of this yes stuff, this is the first time when Bryan went in the corner and started putting his fingers up in the air, very slowly. He was getting, and of course, he built up more and more speed. Yes, yes, yeah. And the camera panned out. And you just get this view of the entire arena. However many people were in there, 8,000 people, 10,000 people, all on their feet, putting their hands, putting their fingers in the air. The sad part is Bryan doesn't remember any of this because he got concussed. That's probably the only thing about the match itself I remember. He got concussed and supposedly has no memory and no recollection of any of this. One of his great moments in his WWE career. He hit the knee to Bray. He climbed the cage. He's sitting on top of the cage 10 feet up. Obviously concussed to all hell. But it was one of the greatest moments in the history of Monday Night Raw. I don't just mean in the history 10, 15 years. All time. One of the great moments in Monday Night Raw history. And Wyatt was part of that moment. Then came the Royal Rumble match, which I maintain is still the best singles match of Bray Wyatt's entire career. No surprise, right? It came against Daniel Bryan. It was a hell of a match. Bray won. And from there came the second moment that I was referring to before, which was this brief program. It wasn't very long. It wasn't an extended program. But it was a program between The Shield, which up to that point had been a heel faction, and the Wyatt family. The fans just gravitated to it. They thought it was so cool to see these two factions facing off. And when they got to the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, before they even were in the ring together, before they touched, you had people on their feet chanting, "This is awesome." Then the match came. And you wonder, well, can the match live up to the billing here? The answer is yes. They had a fantastic match. They told a great story. The people were into it. The way that the Shield at the end there, Roman Reigns was left all alone. He had to fend for himself, but it was too much. He was overcome, and Bray Wyatt got the pin. The Wyatt family got the win. One of my favorite WWE matches of all time was that first meeting between the two teams at that pay-per-view. Now, they had two more matches in the weeks that followed on TV, one on Raw and one on Main Event, of all things. But it's that first meeting that they had on pay-per-view that to me is the most memorable. It just felt like Bray was, at that point, firing on all cylinders. And then he met a brick wall at WrestleMania 30 by the name of John Cena. And it felt like the wheels just came off the car at that point. That was the beginning of what I would call the Eater of Pins era. Remember that? Remember the Eater of Pins? He wasn't the Eater of Worlds. He became the Eater of Pins. In nearly every big match, not every single one, but nearly every big match situation that he would be in for months after that, into the following year, it was almost to the point of comedy, like you would think it's being done on purpose. He would be cutting all of these spooky promos on his opponents, whoever he was going to be facing, whether it was Cena, whether it was Undertaker and Kane, or whoever it was, Randy Orton. And then invariably, he would lose. And he would be made to look like a fucking fool. It was so bad, one of my listeners at the time even put together a video that I shared of every single instance where Bray would cut a scary promo threatening one of his opponents, immediately followed up by a clip of him losing and being pinned or being dumped out of the ring of the Royal Rumble. After a while, you start to wonder how you're supposed to take somebody like this seriously. They talk a big talk, but when push comes to shove, they don't deliver. But the most egregious example, which I mentioned the Royal Rumble, the most egregious example of Vince McMahon not giving a fuck what the fans want, taking a leak on our heads and telling us it's raining outside, was the Royal Rumble match in 2015. One of the most god-awful pieces of shit that I have ever seen. Bray Wyatt was one of many victims in that match. Dumped out of the ring by Kane and Big Show like a sack of garbage. That's what he was treated like. Daniel Bryan, let's get him out of the match early so that everybody can get all the rage out of their systems before Roman Reigns comes out to win the entire thing. One by one they fell. Bray Wyatt, Dolph Ziggler, Dean Ambrose. No great dramatic finish, no creativity or effort put in whatsoever. Bray Wyatt looked like a chump. But then I think of the new Wyatt family storyline. couple of years after that. Actually, late 2016 into the beginning of 2017, where Randy Orton joined the Wyatt family in the match that should have been at WrestleMania 33. Because I was enjoying that storyline. It was a great story that they were telling. And I mentioned Brody Lee earlier, who had his own issues with WWE and his own frustrations that he was vocal about. As much as he enjoyed the people that he met and the people he worked with, I can remember him, whether it was on Chris Jericho's podcast or other shows, just talking about his own experiences and how frustrating it was for him. He would be promised things that then weren't delivered, or they would tell him one thing, but then it would turn out to be a different thing. And all he wanted to do was show them what he could do in the ring. He just wanted to show them that he could contribute. They did put the Intercontinental title on Harper at one point. It was, again, brief. I can remember that ladder match where he and Dolph Ziggler killed each other. But they hit on this storyline where the one person in the Wyatt family who was very suspect of Randy Orton and his intentions and could see what was going on here and the manipulation that was going on here was Luke Harper. We knew it as the viewer. Luke Harper knew it. But it didn't seem like Bray knew it. Rowan didn't seem to know it. If Rowan was even part of the group still at that point, I don't remember timeline was if he was still with them, but I was digging the storyline, and it was building to a match between Orton and Wyatt, or Orton and Harper, rather. But I was hopeful that they would add Luke Harper and make it a triple threat match at WrestleMania, because Bray went to the Elimination Chamber and he won. That was actually one of the better Elimination Chamber matches they've done in recent years. And he won the WWE Championship, only for them to turn around at WrestleMania and for him to drop it to Randy Orton. Luke Harper deserved a spot in that match. I'm not saying he should have won the title, but he was every bit a part of that storyline as the other two guys were. And that was another missed opportunity to get him in a match where it's not a charity case, storyline-wise. He deserved to be in that match. As it was, the match between Orton and Wyatt sucked. It was no good. But then you fast forward to the summer of 2019. All these vignettes that have been airing on TV for months. We had no idea what this was. It was the debut of The Fiend. It was the Firefly Funhouse. It was something out of the mind of Bray Wyatt. Something that he had come up with on his own. Something that he had concocted. All of the creative effort that went into that character, which was unlike anything that I had ever seen before on WWE television. It was unique. I'll say that much. I didn't quite know what to make of it at first. But there would be little, like attention to detail, whether it was with the puppets or something that was on the wall or a reference that he would make. You could tell there was a lot of effort that was put into this, a lot of forethought that was put into this, which is atypical when it comes to WWE storytelling. You don't always get that level of storytelling in this company, but you could tell that he was so invested in this character and he put so much effort into this to make this thing work. The money he spent out of his own pocket, supposedly, on the mask and the costuming and everything that went into it to try to make that character work. And then that debut entrance at SummerSlam for the match against Finn Balor. What a fucking entrance that was. With the lantern, the music. Like I said, unlike anything that this company had ever done before. And he had a dominant win over Finn Balor, and it's like, they have potentially a new monster here on their hands. Now, we know in storyline, okay, obviously it's Bray Wyatt. There were any number of ways they could have gone with this. The story, the way I always looked at it, the story was very simple. This is a guy who lost his marbles. It's not so much a guy who's out there playing magic tricks as much as it's a guy who has gone off the deep end, like the Joker. And he has manufactured this whole world for himself. This whole creepy universe. And you look at some of the booking of his character over the years, and you can understand why he would be so frustrated. And he would go off the deep end. I'd go off the fucking deep end too. People still ask me. They still ask me. And it's still one of my highest viewed reviews on YouTube. About my Hell in a Cell rant from 2019. When The Fiend was still fresh. He had only just debuted a couple of months before this. The match with Balor was 2 months before. And they put him in a Universal Championship match inside Hell in a Cell with Seth Rollins. And I felt It was too soon for something like that. It felt to me like they were going to that well too quickly. They were boxing themselves into a corner because either he wins the title right away, or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, you've already damaged the aura of that character. How are you going to have the Fiend go in there and lose? You don't kill it, but you damage it by doing that. And so what did they do? You all know what they did. They took a shit right in the middle of the ring, and they told the fans, here, enjoy the stench. I'll never forget Sean Waltman's reaction watching that on the live watch-along they did on YouTube. Waltman was all of us that night. I don't even know that he's been invited back for one of those since. But they did that. They put that horrible match together with that horrible finish, only to turn around a few weeks later in Saudi Arabia, because it was so important to wait those extra 3 weeks and piss off your entire fan base in the process with that pay-per-view finish. And they put the championship on him then. And then, in February of last year, the Fiend was dealt a fatal blow when he lost the Universal title to Bill Goldberg at Sweet Saudi Money 5, staying alive in Saudi Arabia. He won the title in Saudi Arabia. He lost the title in Saudi Arabia in less than 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, the Fiend was killed dead. The aura, the mystique, no effort to preserve any of it. You could argue, well, there are ways for him to lose but still look strong and dominant in the process. None of it, because it didn't matter to them. He wasn't the important figure. The important figure was Roman Reigns. The important figure wasn't even Bill Goldberg. Bill Goldberg was he was a transitional champion. He was a tool to get the belt off the Fiend so they can get it on this other guy. So they could do their Battle of the Spears at WrestleMania, which ended up not even happening. The aura, the mystique, all of it fed to Goldberg, who got over in 1998. It was that important to take one of your newer characters and tear it down. It was so important to do that. He was never the same after that. Not to me. Did the Firefly Funhouse match at WrestleMania because of COVID. Had to come up with something unique. It was unique. It was like, I think I described it as being on an acid trip. Not that I have ever been on an acid trip, but I would imagine if I was, it would be something like that. I don't know what to make of that. I enjoyed the Boneyard match more, but I didn't hate it either. It was definitely something different. He technically got a win over John Cena, but I don't look at that as an official match. But by last summer, I was already soured on the Fiend stuff. I was done. That Goldberg match, and just the way it was handled, for me, really killed it. And then they started the stuff with Alexa Bliss. It was 1 year ago. Then he won the title from Braun Strowman, then he lost it a week later to Roman Reigns. Then came the feud with Randy Orton, which was the cure for insomnia. I will not say anything positive about the majority of that feud. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it was something great. It fucking sucked. It built to the Inferno match. Like I said earlier, he got burned. And I gave them credit at the time. I said, we've seen a certain number of Inferno matches in wrestling over the years, going back to the one with Undertaker and Kane at Unforgiven back in 98. And, it makes for a great visual. It makes usually for a shitty match, but it's a great visual. At least they delivered on the stipulation. I mean, they had to play some camera magic to make it work, which they could do because they were in the Thunderdome. But we actually got to see someone, kind of, burned alive. At least they delivered on the stipulation. I'll give them that. Then we didn't see him again. And at WrestleMania, he came back for the match against Randy Orton, and he lost. He lost off of a distraction by Alexa Bliss. And what ended up happening is, aside from the one appearance on TV the next night, we haven't seen or heard from him since, but Alexa Bliss continued on in this role. They effectively gave the Fiend character to Alexa Bliss to make it her own. All the work and the effort and the money this man had put into that character, which had already effectively been killed off, but just handed over to somebody else. Remember the comment I made on the podcast a few months ago? When she started to really go heavy into all the hocus pocus stuff, the Fiend is back. Only difference is the Fiend now pees sitting down instead of standing up. Alexa Bliss became the new Fiend. She created her own version of the Fiend. I saw that when the news came out yesterday, Mickie James Aldis, tweeted, I think what you meant to say, this is in response to the WWE's tweet about letting him go. I think what you meant to say was, thank you so much for coming up with such an incredible gimmick. Time and time again, one so cool and over, we really didn't know how to book it right. So we just gave it to someone else so we can make all the money off of it still and let you go. She says, this isn't against Alexa. I love her. She's an incredible performer who's killing it in a role that she was given. She always does. We as artists take every role that we're given and turn it into gold. He, she, they both did that, like it or not. Facts are facts. Sorry if that offends you. And I will chime in on the Alexa defense here. I do not like this Lily shit with the doll. I think it's fucking stupid. I think all of this has overstayed its welcome. I am by no means a fan of all the Alexa Bliss magic and all the bullshit that they're still doing on television. But I've never criticized Alexa as far as from a performance angle. The stuff that she does, she knocks it out of the park. She's very good in the role. She does what she's told to do. She delivers it in a great way, exactly the way they want it to be. She's all in on the role. She does a great job with it. Doesn't mean it doesn't suck. Mickie is dead on in her tweet. And I'll guarantee you she's not the only person in that company, although she's not in the company anymore, but I guarantee you she's not the only person on the WWE roster who's probably friendly with Bray who feels the same way. So the question now is, what happens with Bray Wyatt? What does the future hold for Wyndham Rotunda? Does he even want to continue wrestling? I don't know. Until he makes a comment, none of us can get into his head. We don't know what his goals are. We don't know what he wants to do with the next several years of his life. I assume he's going to be bound by a 90-day non-compete, but he hasn't been on television in months. For all we know, WWE can freeze his contract. I have no idea how this is going to play out. Nobody does. Naturally, there's going to be a lot of people who say Tony Khan should swoop right in and pick him up. Come on, man. He's a big name. He can fit right in AEW. You know, right now we're all talking about CM Punk and we're talking about Daniel Bryan, and they just got Malachi Black and they got Andrade. And you do run the risk of WWE fatigue. At some point, your roster is so bloated and you start bringing in so much talent that it becomes too much. But I'm not going to sit here and say he doesn't deserve an opportunity to go work somewhere else and show what he can do. Does he come up with an entirely new character? Obviously, he wouldn't be able to call himself Bray Wyatt. Does he reinvent himself for the third time? He's had at least 2 reinventions in his career. Does he come up with another character altogether? I don't know. I'm curious how in another company he might pull off something like that, because we might get a better sense then of whether or not he deserves more of the blame for why things fizzled out with the Fiend the way they did. I'm willing to bet the company had more to do with that than he did, and he probably feels the same way that a lot of people felt. The way they booked that character sometimes. It had to eat him alive inside because of all the effort that he put into it. So I would be very curious to see him land in an AEW or some other company with a similar type of character, just to see if he can pull it off and if he can be even more successful with it, or if it fizzles out and it turns out to be a dud and he gets exposed. He deserves an opportunity as much as anybody else if that's what he wants to do. There's a lot of different companies he can go work for. AEW is probably the biggest of the bunch outside of WWE. Certainly not something I would be bringing him in next week. But do I think if I'm Tony Khan, I would have a conversation with him if he was interested and give him a look? Absolutely. And the natural idea would be the Dark Order. if and when the Dark Order was to go heel again, because, after what happened with Brody Lee, I said it would be very hard to envision the Dark Order being heel and getting booed. But if Wyatt was the one to come in and kind of take the mantle of this dark faction, they're not even really that dark. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's more of a comedy group now, and the word dark is in the name, but there's nothing overly dark about the Dark Order. If they wanted to take it in a dark direction, the one person who could probably do that is Bray Wyatt, under whatever new name he might use. And it would mean something given the connection that group has to Brody Lee and the connection that he had to Brody Lee. And I'm not even sure that's something he would want to do. He might look at that and think it was disrespectful. Who knows? Again, we don't know what's going through his mind. But do I think him coming into AEW maybe months down the road and taking the mantle of that group, taking it in a totally different direction, could work? He's already proven that it could work. He's already led that type of faction in the past. Absolutely it could work. In the spirit of what Brody Lee was doing with that group, absolutely. But we just don't know yet exactly what his plans are. But this is just another in a long line of examples of talent squandered by WWE. For all the success that he had, WWE champion for a month, Universal champion twice, even if the second time was only for a week, tag team champion, he had a lot of moments in WWE. I said at the beginning, it wasn't all bad. But you have a talent like that, and you squander it. And you get to a point where we're going to let you go because of budget cuts. I said earlier, nobody in this company is bulletproof. Everybody is expendable. That's truer for more people than most. There's a select few who maybe that doesn't apply to as much. You think of somebody like a Roman Reigns, for example, or a Randy Orton or somebody like that. But, I look at his career and I look at all of the moments that he did have in 2014, in 2017, or 2019 with the Fiend. And here we are in 2021, and we're talking about John Laurinaitis calling this guy on the phone when he was getting ready to come back. By all accounts, he was ready to make a comeback in August. They had already booked him on some events. This was not somebody who wanted out. He wanted back in. You think he enjoyed sitting on the sidelines for the last 6 months? And to think that it all ended with a phone call from Johnny Ace saying, hey, it's not you, it's me. Sorry. No hard feelings. Let that be a message to every single person who works in that company. That is what WWE thinks of you. If it could happen to him, it could happen to any one of you.